UofSC. I am a professor at the university. I also am formerly the chair of the city's volunteer committee to help advise the city on climate action. And over the past couple of years, I've realized that we want to be able to have a city that's meeting renewable energy goals. Part of what we need to do is figure out how to have large scale energy procurement that is renewable. And I quickly learned that's not that simple. And so to that end, I thought this could be a really useful discussion to have today between Clint Shealy, who's an assistant city manager at the city of Columbia, Danny Kassis, who I'm not remembering the new title, and I'll give you a second to say it, but he's basically like head of renewable energy at Dominion. And that's the half of the state's energy provider. And then Hamilton Davis is with us virtually, and he does a lot of legislative work at a utility scale solar developer. So we have someone who's interested in helping make utilities, someone who helps regulate the utilities, and a customer. You see what I did there? So if you can each take a moment and introduce yourselves in a way that you would like to.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, doctors. We appreciate the opportunity to be here and represent the city of Columbia. My name is Clint Shealy. I am a native of the Columbia area, grew up in South Carolina, and my family still lives here. My wife and I are empty nesters. I have children that attend Clemson or the University School of Medicine. And so my daughter's actually Clemson graduate, go to the university. And so I've been with the city since 2015. I guess the marker on my mind is I started as the waterworks superintendent at the Canal Water Treatment Plant 6 weeks before the 2015 flood. And so that in my career, but it also showed me how much the community in Columbia cares about one another, and how the employees of the city of Columbia care about not failing and making sure that all the services that are so essential are provided for our citizens and our customers. And so really, we need to, okay, I've consulted for 45 years, but this is home. This feels like the right place for me to be in to finish my career in public service. So I've enjoyed my time and then writing different things with the city. As assistant city manager, I get to manage the water and sewer operations, engineering, customer care, and work with public works as well. So it's a variety of, a nice variety of things. And I get to learn something new every day and work with great people. So really enjoy it. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Yeah, it's good to be here this afternoon. Danny Kassis, Dr. Z said, I just changed positions literally today. I previously was the general manager of strategic partnerships and renewables for Dominion Energy. So a legacy South Carolina electric and gas employee. I stayed. I look hopefully young enough to still stay, right? So, but I moved into a different position. And actually it fits perfectly for, I think, the subject matter that we're going to talk about today. So I'm now the GM for business development and customer solutions, which is, I think, the path where renewable adoption actually is driven by customers. So it's not an accident that I just moved into the position. I've essentially worked in the space for a considerable amount of time in my career. So my signature is on a gigawatt of solar. It's basically installed. And to give my fellow panelists enough credit, Hamilton Davis's company he now works for probably initially developed almost all those projects. They don't own them now, but they were part of the development. So spent a lot of time in regulatory space, understanding what it takes, in the current framework to move projects forward. And I'm very much look forward to the discussion.
Excellent, thank you. Hamilton.
Yeah, hey guys, can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, I'm not there in person today, but it's good to see you all. My name's Hamilton Davis. I'm VP of Markets and Regulatory Affairs for Southern Current. I'm a South Carolina native, so I've been around for a while. Had my undergrad degree experience at Clemson, and then law degree from University of South Carolina. So I do have some South Carolina cred with you folks in the room. I spent when I got out of law school, I actually spent 10 years working for the Coastal Conservation League in Charleston and ran the energy and climate program there. And that's where I first met Danny Kassis. So I've been having these conversations with him publicly and privately for well over a decade at this point, but have been involved in legislative regulatory issues related to clean energy in South Carolina since about 2006, and have been hands-on with a lot of the policies that have opened up the market and driven investment primarily in large-scale solar and some rooftop solar as well. And most recently, Act 62, which was passed in 2019 in South Carolina, carved out a space for customer programs in South Carolina. So I'm sure we'll get into the details of that as the panel unfolds. But my company today is primarily focused on large-scale solar and storage projects. We do work across the Southeast as well as Midwestern markets. So have kind of seen how this works in a lot of different places, and maybe can share what that looks like as compared to what we see on the ground in South Carolina today, and where we might be headed. But yeah, looking forward to the conversation. Got a couple great panelists and great moderator, so happy to be here and looking forward to it.
Great, thank you so much. So the format that we're going to do is I have some questions that I prepared for them, and we're going to go through those. And then after we're through, we will have time for questions from the audience or from those that are online as well. So this is a panel about energy procurement. What does renewable energy procurement mean to you? Let's just start there. Sure.
So when I think about renewable energy, I think about some of the, on a smaller scale for the city, because that's how I view things through the city lens as a customer. I think about what are the options that are available for us. The first thing that comes to my mind is a wonderful hydroelectric generating facility, a beautiful historic facility that was damaged due to the 2015 flood I mentioned in my introduction. And there's very strong desire to get that facility back up and operating, which is going to happen, and the funding piece is happening there. That's average of 5 megawatt, maximum capacity around 10 megawatt of good renewable energy that's available for us, just simply by restoring our canal and the things that we're planning to do from the water supply perspective as well. So that's one piece that, yes, it's going to take a lot of heavy civil work to make that happen, but the funding's in place. So looking forward to moving that forward. I think about solar energy as an opportunity, and as Danny and I looked at the city operational footprint, that Dr. Z and some of the members of CPAC that helped us look at that. You know, what would that mean in terms of a solar footprint? You're talking upwards of maybe a 40 megawatt solar farm. That's not a gigawatt, but things were really big to me. But solar and battery storage is something that's available to us here in the Southeast. And then I think about doing that on a smaller scale, a project that we have had on the books in the utility department for a while. That's a small scale solar at one of our treatment facilities. We were looking at doing that in our wastewater treatment facility where we have some property. Because of some interconnection, connectivity issues there, we may proceed with doing that at our Lake Murray water treatment plant at a 1 megawatt scale rather than a 2 megawatt. We may do the water plant first and follow that up with the wastewater treatment plant. But those are in the books and under design. So that's something, again, smaller scale, but more tangible that we're moving forward. And then I think about, if any of y'all heard the mayor's introduction and welcome remarks, he mentioned biogas, waste to energy, those sorts of things. We've got a fairly modern wastewater treatment facility off of Interstate 77 for a wastewater treatment plant. And right now we're digesting biosolids anaerobically and that produces methane gas. And we use that methane gas during cooler months to fire the boilers, and that heats the digesters and enhances the digestion process. In the summer months, we don't have that need, and we flare the gas. We want to do something better with that biogas. It's not a lot of gas, but it is a energy source that we're going to continue to have, and we'll capture that and do something beneficial with that. So those are the things that just come to my mind in terms of renewable and how every one of those has its own procurement story. I'll stop there.
Okay, what does renewable energy procurement mean to you?
Yeah, you probably would expect me to answer this way. It really depends, especially now in my new position, but it's actually a belief I have for really a long period of time. It's the customer's definition. So I guess over the course of career, I managed our large customer group, which was maybe the largest 500 customers on the Dominion system. And then I had another group that managed the customers that were subordinate to that, but really all the commercial and at the end of the day, all the residential. So, procurement means different things to different people. So my career spanned 35 years. So Boeing had a definition, for example. You fly over their roof today, it's covered by 2.6 megawatts of solar. That's not the rest of the story. They actually have created, with our collaboration, they've created an offset for the rest of their electrical energy across their enterprise in South Carolina, which is remarkable accomplishment because we really started on this in 11. Okay, so we're like a decade down the road. That's their definition. The automotive cluster might have a slightly different, solved, their desire, for instance, individual customers' desire to be clean and to create offsets. So their definition of procurement might be a little different. The broad categories that I think about when I break it up, I think about, for some people, clean energy means I just want to essentially acquire a green attribute. They want what's called a renewable energy credit. But that's just what I would call 101. So that helps a developer then to create financing for his project. But they don't own the project. So it might not meet the definition. A lot of customers are interested in self-generating. I talked about a couple of projects that are self-generation focused. So that means that you're actually at the physical site. That solar storage, those are the dominant renewable energy assets that go into service. So you're producing, and then you're, for the most part, consuming what you produce. So that's another form of procurement, all structured within South Carolina law. But there are a couple of other approaches. They haven't been, in this market, have not been as, and I'll explain why, but in this market, they are utility scale. And again, there's nothing that prohibits us in this room from going and investing in a project and actually owning the asset. But it becomes so big, I doubt you can find a place to put it unless you put it somewhere in rural South Carolina or away from the coast. So there's a way contractually to enter into that. I can tell you, if you collectively hold all our money together in this room, and you wanted to do about a 75 megawatt solar project, we could do it if we had wealth and means. Okay, takes 75 megawatts takes roughly a day about $100 million. You can own it if you want, and actually, if you have tax liability, you get tax credit, and you probably get property tax relief. It's the most efficient way to bring projects to bear, but most people aren't interested in making that level of investment to asset ownership. And I think that's where the puzzle gets a little bit more complicated. Because it takes money, it takes resources, it has to work, right, within the system. Because the utility company, whether it's Dominion or whether it's Duke, they own requirement to be the system operator. So they have to integrate it, and then they have to also ensure that all the rest of the customers are served affordably and reliably. That's the problem that you're trying to solve. So you can bring on a lot of renewables, but you have to do it in a way that, I guess, doesn't break what I call the three-legged stool. So it has to be affordable, it has to be reliable or create reliability. And the last item is, you want to solve for what we're trying to do is to make it increasingly clean. And oh, by the way, we have a mutual goal that generally our customer has. We're going to want to be as clean, and we are feeling the same. We're in the same environment that our customers, which is our investors want increasingly clean. So it's actually the convergence of complicated things, but they're converging all to the right place. And so that's, within law, and I think I'm gonna open the door for Hamilton, because actually within law, there's actually a provision in Act 62, which is a much more, what I would describe as prescriptive approach to renewable energy. There's a concept called voluntary renewable energy program, part of Act 62. And I think that's probably a great place, but that's not the only one. But
We'll get to the house.
okay,
Yeah. So Hamilton, what does procurement, renewable energy procurement mean to you, considering all that was said down here?
Yeah, so I think I'll focus on the large scale aspect of this. As Clint mentioned and Danny mentioned, there's certainly applications that fit on site for customers to actually consume production from a clean energy generating source. A lot of that's done through a net metering or a solar leasing type structure. Leasing tends not to be very attractive for tax exempt entities in the state because you're not able to take advantage of the federal income tax credits. And so getting the economics to work can make that harder. And you also, as a city of Columbia or a large university, tend to have loads that require a facility be placed off-site. So I think a lot of the conversation around how you access clean energy is complicated by that tension where you can't just do it on your rooftops. You really need to be a part of some program that's designed to accommodate that demand. And in South Carolina and in the Southeast generally, we're in vertically integrated utility markets. And so as a customer, you can only buy power from one entity, which is the utility, Mr. Kassis, and if you're in Columbia. And if you're a solar developer, we can only sell power to one entity. So it's a monopsony market as well. So we have to sell to the utility. So there's got to be some type of program, some type of interface that allows for that to happen. A lot of the large scale solar we've seen developed, especially in the Carolinas, has been a consequence of a federal requirement under PURPA, which is an old law from the late 1970s, which essentially requires that small power producers be able to sell to a utility at what's called an avoided cost, which is intended to make sure customers are protected from that power purchase so that the cost of power within a power purchase agreement is at or below the utility's cost to produce that power. So it's essentially a wash or a savings for customers. That has been the prime mover for most of the solar that we've seen deployed, but that has become I think less attractive as more solar has come onto the system, and there are reasons for that would bore you if I went into them. But what we've seen in its place is more of a focus on competitive procurement. And kind of early on in the Carolinas, probably starting in around 2018, Duke Energy took the first step in this direction. And what they were relying on was an integrated resource plan that looks at their system needs over the course of a 15+ year time horizon and identifies the amount of clean energy resources that make sense from an economic and reliability standpoint. And then they went out and started procuring that solar capacity on an annual basis. They actually just had the third tranche of that earlier this year. And so that's been the place where a lot of activity has taken place of late. And so the first thing I think about with procurement is a process like that, where the utility simply is now meeting a demand for clean energy that's based on just a planning exercise. What we're now seeing though is a customer component that's being mapped onto that type of procurement. And so with the 2019 law I mentioned in South Carolina, Act 62, the Energy Freedom Act, there were fairly prescriptive guidelines as to kind of the minimum standards that would be needed in new customer programs in South Carolina. And what it allows is a customer to actually go out, negotiate a power purchase price with a solar developer like Southern Current, and then apply to a program either run by Duke or Dominion, where the customer essentially would be getting a credit for the power produced from a solar facility. And depending on the price that's negotiated, it could either be cost neutral for the customer, there could be cost savings there, or there could be a cost premium. So there's a difference between the cost in the PPA and the avoided cost of the utility. And that's kind of the metric that's used to determine whether or not there's a savings, neutrality, or cost to the structure. And so that is that now I think is one of the primary vehicles that you're seeing around the country. That's dominated the North Carolina market. Danny, I don't know, maybe you can give us an update when we get into this in more detail as to where y'all's program stands right now. I mean, most of this was done and implemented over COVID, and so a lot of it's new in South Carolina, and I think still kind of getting up and running. But that's out there, that's available. That's the kind of thing that I think is going to generally be attractive to large users. And then maybe just a third example in another program style that you see in places like Alabama, the TVA territory, where the utility is actually going out running RFPs on behalf of the customers, doing the negotiating, finding projects that are cost effective and fit customer needs. And then there's a program design that allows the customer to take advantage of the clean energy attributes that come along with that power. And there are different ways to address how it's actually credited to the customer on their bill, whether or not it's a savings opportunity or maybe some small premium associated with it. So that's kind of the world of procurement as I think about it from a large scale solar development perspective. And as Danny indicated, I think we're just going to continue to see more and more demand in South Carolina. We already have the Volvos and BMWs and Boeings and Googles here. I think we're going to see more of that type of company that has very aggressive clean energy obligations that they've identified. And the need to continue to refine access and program design, I think it would be with us for a while, but there are a lot of good models out there, and we've already started taking some strides in a good direction.
Great. You guys have lots of acronyms and how you talk about things. Not everybody here is going to be understanding all those acronyms. So to that end, if you have an organization that has a large energy usage and wants to procure renewable energy, what is legally available to them in the state of South Carolina right now?
Hamilton mentioned the REP. So it's a voluntary renewable energy program. So by the way, utilities invented most of the acronyms. So that, and actually, to Hamilton I just really asked the question, he said, where, kind of in this continuum of kind of regulatory chronology, where does that stand? So the program is approved. We're simply waiting for, you need the avoided cost in the program to then be able to determine the differences and actually create commercial terms. So that order's not, surprisingly, hasn't been issued yet. So there's a directive. So there's already, but that's what we're waiting on. So we need the avoided cost, and then that actually starts to fill in the rest of the blanks. So that's a piece of it. There are more customized ways to move to the approach. They're still all, in the end of the day, require regulatory approval. So there's a cornerstone, I think, in the way laws are today, with maybe a couple of exceptions identified in law or in statute. But at the end of the day, participants pay, non-participants don't pay. Just And I think that's so, that's really the part of what this challenge is around the procurement, is that because you're bearing all those costs, and your reference point is usually the only reference to the vertically integrated market is the avoided cost. That's the plus or the minus that you have to do.
So are you saying basically you want, if an organization, a customer, a large customer wants the system to do better, they basically have to pay the premium for forcing the utility to work faster?
Not exactly, but what I will say is if you, and I mean I don't want to speak to like the details of Hamilton's model, although I was just on a phone call with his chief development officer like 10 o'clock this morning, so we're very collaborative. I understand his model so good that he probably could go work for them if I wanted to. So, but it, you know, in today's market, because of supply chain, and in our case, because we've already done 1,000 megawatts of solar, you know, the price difference might be, but there's a long-term view, and again, the way you structure the market over time, does that then, the investment then become not the premium, but it becomes lower cost.
Yep.
And I think that's an important feature that you really have to, that's like the most critical commercial detail. It's all set.
Yeah, and with anything to add to that? In terms
Yeah,
of what's
go ahead.
possible today for a large consumer?
Yes, I mean, as Danny said, like the metric that really matters the most is the avoided cost, and we're waiting on an order from the Public Service Commission on that will provide some insight into what that's about to be. But it's also the increment of time that you're measuring that on. And so if you look at, if you're calculating a 5-year avoided cost, it's going to be significantly lower than a 10-year or 15 or 20-year avoided cost. So it matters for the contract term and you know, over what period you're measuring it. And generally what you see is as you go into the future, prices increase. A lot of these are dictated by like natural gas curves, and that tends to be what solar's competing with on the avoided cost, from the avoided cost perspective. And so yeah, I mean, I'd you know, note that there's certainly supply chain related issues that have caused solar to go back up in cost of late. I think those are short-term trends, and longer-term trends we'll continue to see price decreases. Even with those changes, I think generally you've got a resource that's competitive, especially if you're looking at a 15 or 20-year term versus a shorter 5 or 10 year. So I mean, it's all about program design, right? Like we're seeing procurements in the Carolinas that are cost effective as compared to the price the utility would otherwise pay. And to the extent that you are crafting that procurement in the context of a customer program, then there's an opportunity for that customer to actually see savings as a consequence of participating rather than seeing a premium. But you know, the details matter. And so whether or not you have access to a 20-year term, currently Dominion's program, the PSC approved program has 10-year terms, or at least the crediting mechanism is based on a 20-year calculation or 10-year calculation. So that makes it potentially more challenging, but you know, Danny can tell you nonetheless, a lot of 10-year contracts have been signed at that rate over the years. So it's you don't know what's in the market until you go check it, and it's kind of the beauty of procurements, RFPs, right? Like you don't have to speculate. You can actually go out and find out whether or not there's a project that meets your needs at the price that you're looking for. And it's essentially a low to no risk way of identifying what's available and whether or not it's something a customer wants to move forward with.
You also have something.
Yeah, I just wanted to share in terms of procurements and renewables. And one of the things I've learned from talking with smart people like Hamilton and Danny is when you're thinking about trying to meet a larger goal like the city's Ready for 100 pledge, that is quite daunting. when we're looking to procure something of that scale, what matters, two important things are scale and turn. And so rather than forge our own path, we've thought through the help of our Crime Protection Action Committee, it would be nice if this was more of a regional concept and so we could get more folks involved and improve on the scale of what we're looking to do. So we've been actually participating in a regional cohort, learning about how to procure renewable energy. And so the city of Richland County, the Columbia Housing Authority, the University of South Carolina, the Richland County School District number 1, and probably several others that I'm not thinking of when we wrote that group. We've been talking collaboratively about how we might do something larger that would help advance the Midlands goal and the city's place for Ready 100, but also help us at a larger scale. And so we've developed kind of some tenets. And he talks about free-like school. You know, the services, the reliability of service is really important. If we don't have power, we can't treat drinking water and distribute that to customers. We can't handle waste and process that and protect the environment. We can't do a lot of the essential services that our citizenry rely on every day. So Dominion is a very important business partner of ours. So that reliability, that business relationship is really, really important. Affordability is important. If we can say we want to meet these goals and we want to be renewable by 2036, but we want to try to do it in a way that's affordable for customers that are buying power directly from the moon, but also paying our water and sewer bills and paying our taxes. So affordability and cost neutrality is really important. And all of the members of the cohort, well, UofSC been beating that drum, the school district, all the facility folks are like, well, hey, wait, now I don't know that needs to go up. We're all for this, but we don't want to pay too much more for this. So those are all important things. And the other thing I think is important is we work together to come up with common threads and goals is, we prefer not to invest in a wind farm in the Midwest or a solar farm in Arizona. We really would like to have at least a component of what we're doing here locally so that our citizens and our children can see it, touch it, feel it, learn from it, and let that be a building block. So that's really, really important to us. And finally, the environmental justice component of it that you spoke to an earlier session, we don't want to take advantage of one group of our citizenry to benefit others. So it needs to benefit all. So those are some of the things that we as a group are coalescing around as we enter into and talk with Danny and others about how we might procure and how we might get into the renewable business on a larger scale.
You want to speak to that or?
No, look, I wouldn't be in the job that I'm currently in on April 1, but I didn't think customers were going to drive the conversation, and whether it ends up being whether that's a legislative path or whether it's a much more customized path. I think those are fascinating things to work through and to solve, because I don't think it's. I agree with Hamilton. I don't think it's not. We haven't just done it and then it's done. So if you look at our plan, for instance, our integrated resource plan, it's dated. It's always dated because once you file it, then so many things will change. But it has 2,000 megawatts of solar. It has 700 megawatts of storage. It's based on analysis on when you get to affordability. That's not inconsequential. That would put us at about 3,000 megawatts of solar, 700 megawatts of storage. Well, actually, based on some contracts I signed recently. So it's the question is the pace, right? The pace, and then you balance the pace with the affordability. So I do also agree with that. It's we're in a tough time right now because this period just like the supply chain is just not. It's not what was anticipated for the solar developers trying to figure out how to move things forward. So you could see a period where, there might be a couple of years where you're not seeing things, but there's activity that's happening, whether it be in discussions around legislation, whether it be discussions between the development community and utility, or between customers. I think it's setting the stage for what I think is the next iteration.
And Hamilton, in your world, have you seen any cohorts or interacted with cohorts that have done something what Clint's talking about?
I'm sorry, ask that again, Laura, I could barely hear you.
That was fast to be. So in terms of in your world, have you seen this cohort type of model that you've worked with in terms of development?
Yeah, I've not worked on it directly, but you definitely see it. I was actually just I was looking through one of my news feeds today and saw that TVA is building a plant on behalf of, or contracting for procurement from a plant, solar plant, on behalf of Google and Facebook together. And so it's certainly not unusual to have more than one customer working with others. There's an economy of scale that comes with larger plants. Typically, there are caveats to that, but generally, as you get bigger, you get cheaper, and so having a larger capacity need from a group of customers could certainly provide access to better financing or better economics of a project.
Great, thank you. So a lot of this has been talking about big customers, which is probably not very relevant to the average consumer. And so I wanted to shift gears slightly and talk about the individual. And so what about individual citizens? How can they procure renewable energy now or in the future?
So, two ways. I think there's Act 236 actually created it was so broadly written, and it was really designed to be a catalyst for the beginning of renewable energy development in South Carolina. So Hamilton can take credit for writing it. It was pretty well written. It had a lot of symmetry. So one of the things it allowed utilities to do was to create community solar programs. So in that program at the time, I think probably we created the largest community solar program in the United States. Now, it's been ellipsed, it's been well past, but we did 16 megawatts of community solar. I'm glad you're recording because I really like the community solar model. I think the one provision that I never really liked in Act 62 it was clear it had that participant must pay, non-participant can't bear an emotion. So you can run through the math all you want to, but at the end of the day, it's very, very complicated. It takes a ton of resource and you can't solve, but you got to be really, really, really big. And it's got to work within your resource plan and your system. So it's a plug for, I think, what's community solar. I think that's a you'll see different models in different states. There's a couple of other states that have, I think, employed models that are moving to satisfy.
And just for someone, like community solar means like I can put it on my bill so that you, Dominion, are generating solar power and I'm getting those electrons theoretically to my house.
Dr. Z, I'll run it through because all right, so in South Carolina, community solar is an asset that's not sited physically at your site. It's located somewhere else. Actually, the 3 projects that we did in our portfolio were all developed by Southern Current initially and then sold to a third party who then owns those, takes advantage of the tax credits, and then delivers to the system. But they don't deliver to the system directly to the point where they're consumed. They're just delivering to the system. So we're essentially assigning the energy and giving it a value that we have the flexibility in that set of legislation to actually assign a value that was closer to retail and not to wholesale. So made the math. It's an eloquent solution, but it was the right solution at a time when prices for solar were beginning to drop, but they hadn't taken the full range of price reduction. So it was a way to make it work. And so we actually used it as a program for churches, schools, and municipalities. But we also created a carve out for residential. And there's a carve out for load monitoring. So a megawatt, or in this case, there was 16 megawatts total. So 1/16, so 6%, 6% with the load monitoring. And the only thing we asked them to do was to make sure they had a requirement in our, when we wrote our program. We asked them to do energy efficiency, home energy checkup. So make sure they were consuming the minimal amount of energy that was required. And if they did that, they got a subscription basically to a solar asset. So for example, my mom owns part of a fraction of community solar. Really good.
Yeah.
So it's
I'm
designed.
jealous because I kind of want to get into it.
I like the program, and I think that's the challenge, is that, it was for its time, we literally got fully subscribed within a really, really short period of time.
Hamilton, thank you, Tyler.
Yeah, I mean, well, I get, the community solar model is certainly a tough one, especially if you're talking about smaller projects and ensuring that it's in the best interest of attractive for participants and isn't pushing cost on the non-participants. It is always the trick when you're talking about any of these programs, quite frankly. And I think there are models for community solar that look a lot like what we're talking about for large customers that may work, but it tends to not be as exciting maybe for the customers if the benefit that you're getting is from a solar farm that's out in the country, and you want something in your actual community that you can see and take credit for. So there's some tricks there. I do think though, I mean, from a customer standpoint, especially like a homeowner or a small business, the economics of storage are changing rapidly. The costs are coming down. I think that's going to be a huge component of what homeowners and business owners are thinking about in the future. And I think that what that's also going to force is a reevaluation of rate structure. So really getting price signals from the utility for what does it actually cost to deliver you that kilowatt hour at 2 o'clock in the afternoon versus 8 p.m. in the evening, and using a combination of solar and storage to really deliver value to the customer, but also back to the utility, so that other customers are seeing the benefit of that in a much more precise and deliberate way. And so I think that we're just going to see dramatic changes in that application and those opportunities as the years roll by. And I know we're kind of still in a rate structure situation in South Carolina that's pretty generic in terms of the price signals it sends. If you're cranking your AC up in the afternoon and deciding to wash dishes and laundry at the same time, you're essentially paying the same thing that if you were doing that on an off-peak time. And so I think the migration towards smart rates and how that opens up access to these new technologies as like storage as prices come down will be big game changers. And I think that ample opportunity for the utility to play a big role in taking advantage of that to the benefit of the system. And of course, you've got EVs as well, electric vehicles, and how that fits in with these other pieces. It will be I think it's an exciting decade that we've got just starting to unfold at the moment.
Individual side.
Well, I think about that we've got so many of our citizens, residents of Columbia are renters. And when you mentioned the business owners and the homeowners, and I don't want to exclude the folks that are renting properties, but maybe want to contribute to the solution. And I don't know what that answer is, but trying to give them opportunity to be a part of something as well, I think would be important. That is a big portion of our citizenry. It includes a lot of younger folks that are renting, attending university or various institutes of higher learning in our city, but also some other moderate income renters as well. And so, how do we collectively provide them with tools or the solution as they
So I think that if you are new to all this, you're probably overwhelmed by a lot of the legalese and rules that have been talked about. And so I think it's worthwhile having a moment of just the, like, how are the rules made for all this energy procurement in the state?
So, you can't do this job. You, let me say this, you can't, I have an engineering degree, I'm a mechanical engineer. And I probably spent more of my time actually in the utility and finance. But the light really doesn't come on until you understand legislation, which drives policy. And the fact that the utility model as it exists and will probably to some degree always be regulated. So you, at the end of the day, you can't extricate the model from legislation. You can't, which kicks it over to regulation. So I always tell people that are a lot of smart people that work for me, you cannot truthfully understand all the details of the business model until you understand the regulatory framework. That then frames up really how ultimately things get done. I never wanted to be an expert on energy policy. I never wanted to go before the Public Service Commission and testify. Did it 5 times last year. It's just very different. That's a space that Hamilton likes and resides in. And, but I mean, that's how it
So okay,
He never testified, by the way. I haven't seen him testify in a while. He likes being the facts and present now. Mostly.
I think it's the details. That's how I got to know him. Anyways, yeah, so tell us, how are energy laws made in the state and how are they regulated?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, as Danny said, like it's certainly important to recognize that literally almost everything that happens, and this is different than the markets we're generally used to operating within in this country, but pretty much everything that happens is done through a policy framework that's adopted by the state legislature and then implemented at the Public Service Commission. And so just an example of like a major change that has driven a significant amount of the rooftop solar, the homeowner solar we've seen in the state. It was illegal in South Carolina to lease solar panels prior to 2015. That was viewed as a sale of electricity from an unregulated entity, a non-utility, to a homeowner, which, as we talked about earlier, you can't do. You can only sell power to a utility. And so essentially the definition of leasing was changed in the state to accommodate that as a different way for consumers to access the technology. And so there's just an endless list of that type of detail, that some of which it makes sense to change in the current model, and some of which will not change as long as we have the model that we have. But yeah, I mean, it's, typically what you get is some type of inertia, some type of push. A lot of times it's customers. With the leasing, it was customers, it was churches that were interested in accessing solar, and kind of started beating on that drum and got a lot of folks interested back in 2014, 15. Now it's conversations like this where you've got municipalities and universities and others that are looking for access. They've got their own goals, not sure how to get there. And as they run into barriers or opportunities, you either expand programs or you recognize that, hey, there's an impediment here that needs to be addressed. And then you'll see customer groups organize or environmental groups organize, or the solar industry has associations that we participate in and represent our interest. And you go and write policy and work with legislators and get something changed and take it to the Public Service Commission, where it then gets implemented through the regulatory process. But it is often complicated and expensive and takes a lot of time to get from, kind of wherever you are to maybe where you want to be. So I think we've got, we've done a lot of work in this state in the last 7 years or so, and have seen an enormous amount of response by way of the amount of clean energy that's come on the grid. I don't know what the average citizen's perspective is on South Carolina and what we've done as compared to other states. But I think, Danny, y'all have got what Dominion has the highest per customer watt of solar in the Southeast, I think, right now. Duke Energy is one of the top utilities in the country for installed solar. So a lot has happened. And I think we've got a good framework to continue to take some steps forward, but inevitably, there'll be another round of policy changes. And there's a constant churn at the Public Service Commission that oversees most of these decisions, where, on an annual basis, the utilities are in there, solar industry, environmental groups, customers, hashing out details as to how a program gets implemented or refined, or kind of what comes next. So it's a ever changing, but always challenging environment to get things done in.
I'm going to put you on a spot and ask you a question I did not tell you I was going to ask. Has the city before now been ever thinking about the PSC and regulations and things like that as it pertains to how to do this?
Yeah, so as a utility provider of water and wastewater services, we're a public provider, we're not regulated by the Public Service Commission. We interface with wet utilities that on the private side do, so a little bit of knowledge there, but in terms of how the energy industry is regulated, it really is not part of our thought process. But I think y'all both use the term complex, unbelievably complex, sometimes political, sometimes frustrating, but I know from just from how we're regulated as a drinking water provider, those regulations are there to protect our customers and ensure that the product that you get doesn't harm you, it's a beneficial use. And I view the regulation from the Public Service Commission is, albeit flawed sometimes, a way to protect ratepayers as well. So I think it's maybe a necessary evil that we have, and that's kind of how we view that as a way to regulate the industry and make sure that we're all protected. So sometimes hard to appreciate, but I'm learning about it as we go. Got a great appreciation for those that have figured it out and understand how we navigate that process.
Yeah. Just a comment, but I think this is instructive. So I told you I was a mechanical engineer. So I didn't know anything about solar energy in 20, other than the stuff I had done with both. Okay. So I think there's going to be, for someone who's building an organization, now in my new job, I think there's going to be a huge influx of people who are going to learn from those who kind of went through iteration 1 and iteration 2. It will fill the void. And I think it will lead to, another iteration and another iteration. So it's not, I just happen to think of it different. I've spent time with Hamilton and other folks learning their perspectives and how the business model works. And I think Clint's doing the same thing. Our frequent conversations are centering around, let me make sure I understand how this works. I think there's a whole group of people who are going to be commercially smart about how you get some of the stuff done, paths you have to take to do it. I don't think I'm going to have a monopoly on that. I'm going to teach a bunch of people how to do it. And I may not be doing it, but I think it's going to be a lot different. We can sit here in a couple of years, and I promise you it'll be different. We'll all be smarter. We won't be the smartest people in the room. I don't think we are today. I just think we learned about it primarily organically because we had to. Right, we studied. And I think you're going to see the void filled for sure.
Right, so this isn't slow. I'm skipping my super slow question to be like, how can we speed it up then? And so if from a consumer standpoint, you're gonna be frustrated that this is all happening slow. There's reasons why. What could speed it up, and should we speed it up?
I think it's driven by customers. So I've engaged. I'll give you 2 examples. I'm not going to, but I mean, I've done the early work, or at least the early work, what I described before. And there were entities who were willing to effectively pay for it to get their goal. I just think there's so much pressure now for people to reach goals around carbon and around climate, that's going to be the drive. And I think and also I think it's the view. Hamilton alluded to it, but I mean, at the end of the day, in a nutshell, it's, are we allowed to take a long review? And if it's a long review, then, it then creates the ability to finance and get to different answers. I'll give you, and sometimes it just, you make one effort and it doesn't quite get you there. And one of the examples that Hamilton mentioned was concept of storage. And I'm a big believer, I've got testimony to talk about where I think storage can help us in the transition.
I heard you say garbage trucks.
Talked a lot about it. I think ultimately it's going to be a tool behind meters that are going to be, it's going to be incredibly beneficial if the parties can figure out how it helps to create really flat load, right? So you produce the energy behind your meter, you kept it, stored it, and then you consumed it. Perfect. And if the utility needed it, you can deliver it to the utility. There's some fascinating things we can do with that whole concept. But it's going to take some additional, what I would describe as maybe experimentalism, people stepping out a little bit to get some stuff done.
Should it go faster?
I would love to see it go faster. I think from a customer side, from a city side, and a government employee side, we are just inherently cautious by nature because we're spending public dollars. And so what might, if we were spending private dollars, what might land us, unpopular with shareholders or unemployed, may find you in a much worse place if you're a public official. We just got to be really, really careful how we procure things and to make sure we're making wise investments. And we're also a little bit risk averse. We like the long haul, steady return on investment, make good business decisions over the long haul that minimize the risk to our ratepayers. So sometimes that's in contrast to speed. The technology is also evolving, the processes are evolving. And so the last thing we want to be is serial number one. I know we're not going to be in this space, but as storage opportunities evolve, we want to be part of that discussion and do this in the right way. And then finally, just because we're so reliant on the power that our business partner Dominion provides, anything that would disrupt that reliability, we're just super cautious against. So those are the reasons it moves slowly. The public procurement process moves slowly. Those aren't excuses. Those are realities of the place that we live in. But I also think sometimes it protects us from getting ahead of our skis, so to speak. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and Hamilton, should it go faster or should it not? What could get us there if we want to go faster?
So I think what we need to recognize is they're two different kind of classes of access here. Some of which are readily available today and are being done all over the country. And like we talked about, Dominion has a program that's been approved. Once those avoided cost rates are confirmed and set by the commission, then that program will open up, and then we'll see whether or not there's customer demand in the state for that type of program. So we're on the doorstep of testing out a new product and finding out how the market responds to it. There are also variations on that, like we talked about, where the utility could essentially just go out and procure and provide the clean energy credits, the renewable energy credits, to customers that sign up for that program. Depending on how the procurement goes, that can either be essentially just a wash for the customer, where they're not paying any real premium, they're just getting the benefits of it. And they're different ways. The challenge with some of those programs is how do you allocate access, and is it a first come first served basis? How do you, if you're given something that has a really, providing a program that has a super low hurdle and doesn't require the customer to put really any skin in the game, then everybody's going to want to do it, right? And it's just a race to fill it up. So there are things like that need to be figured out. But these are fairly straightforward programs that are tried and true. There's not a reliability component to it. There's not a risk component to it. It isn't as though a customer has some back end exposure to cost that they're shifting on to their customers or constituents. So I think we need to be doing those things that are obvious and available today, and I expect we'll see momentum and access this year on some of that. And then there's there's the more complicated approach and things that are technology dependent, and where is storage going to go, and where will we see policy changes arise in response to some of this demand. We've got a legislative study committee right now that's focused on market reform considerations. So this part of what that legislative study committee is talking about is looking at the overall regulatory structure and deciding whether or not there are small changes or big changes that may be to the benefit of consumers and the state writ large. So those things take time, and we'll be working on big conversations like that for many years. But there's no question that you've got economically attractive clean energy opportunities today, and hopefully we'll be tapping them sooner than later.
So that's great. So one final closing question for you. What do you wish the general public knew about renewable energy procurement? You never said it.
Yeah, I did really say it. Is that I think we've all acknowledged, there's complexity. But what I'd also say is that I think the void gets filled by smart people who experientially have negotiated contracts, understand some of the nuances, understand policy. I think that space fills up quicker than you think. But your takeaway is it's kind of like trying to find a parking spot here to use the app. It ain't easy. And that's but I think people always want the easy one, right? Go to the parking spot. That's not the way it works. You gotta download the app, all the stuff. But I think it's going to be easier as we move down the continuum.
Like training, you gotta go through the hard stuff before it gets easier.
You run the 10K, you better run the 10K. Yeah.
I will say, so your parting words about what do you want the general public to know about renewable energy procurement?
I guess it's hard to know what the average person does think about it, right? Like you see different things when you turn on the news and read the paper. But I think that maybe there's not quite an understanding of the level of maturity that the clean energy industry is at the moment. And this like South Carolina, and the conversation we're having is just radically different than it was in 2015 when we passed our first big piece of clean energy legislation. And it's significantly more sophisticated. The economics are much improved, and we've come a long way. And I think I hope people appreciate how much has been done and how much opportunity we still have in front of us. This is not pie in the sky. This is the direction the world's moving. It's the direction South Carolina's moving. But the details matter, and that's what. I guess that's what I get paid for, and Danny and Clint get paid for, figure out those details.
Yeah, so I would just say that I appreciate the positive energy that we get from our citizen engagement and encouraging us to let's hurry up and get something done. And I think we're closer than we've ever been, and we've got a lot of really good momentum toward meeting already this unbelievably daunting pledge of ready for 100, but we're starting to eat that elephant. There's a path there, and I think that if we're smart about it, we can do this. And I feel really positive about it, and we will do this. And so I appreciate everybody's patience, and just encourage folks to get involved and be part of it, because there's so many ways that we can. Small steps that we can individually take, as well as doing these big overarching things but every step that we take individually helps lighten the load.
All right, thank you. So I'm gonna take some Q&A. There is a question online where someone has posted it in your regulatory space. And so they were curious about how does Arcadia Power work in particular for trying to get things back to Dominion or partnership or not, et cetera. What is Arcadia Power? Does anyone know?
So Arcadia is an interesting model. So I used to actually run call centers at one time. So I think when they first were in the market, that was my first experience. And as I worked further and further into the renewable space, I understood a little more. So with their, so they'll send you, you'll link up with them and they will say, we'll pay the bill. And oh, by the way, we'll create some green impact. So when you do that, you know you're giving them your information, right? So, and I mean, information is power. And so, their model is to, they essentially take your space in terms of engagement with us. But they're interested in, over time, the evolution of the model. Could it be the aggregation of customers, and could they own data, which then allows them to perpetuate a model that's different than this today? That's likely probably what their approach is. I'm not signing up for Arcadia, by the way.
So I've never thought about the big data buyers for renewable energy.
Yeah, but if you sign up, you self-select, right? Yeah. So you told me you're interested in, so could that be later in another iteration of the model, an opportunity? I think there's actually a more efficient way to get to the answer. It's a combination, I think, of we've seen in other jurisdictions.
Any questions?
Thanks for it's a great panel. And I had a couple of comments that first of all, I think the idea of the local energy, producing it locally is a great idea. And I just moved back to Columbia. I taught in Carolina for a long time, and now I'm retiring back. Where I was living, there was a school that was built as kind of totally renewable. And the school itself was the classroom. It was fantastic. So I think that's really important. At the same time, I also was able to buy my third supplier energy from Texas because it was 100% wind, which South Carolina, I don't know if we're producing wind or not, but and also the energy check from Dominion is great. I advise everybody to take advantage of that. We just solarized our home, so now I want to get into I'd like to hear your response or take on from the residents' point of view. So we put solar up. Our rates were changed, so we have to do some sort of variable rate, which I was not aware of. Maybe I should have been. We're not able to buy from a third supplier, and we also don't get any solar certificates, which we used to get when we sold right in another state. These are all incentives. I'm just wondering what your take on how these in the weeds in a sense, but at the resident, the customer level, how these incentives could be, how there could be improved or whatever, how the incentives could be improved through models like this, perhaps the kind of thing that Hamilton is talking about.
If you really want to know what I think, I have a whole pile of testimony.
Okay.
But I'll give you the short version.
Give me the short version now.
Yeah, sure. So actually, one of the reasons why you ended up in the requirement was to be in the time of use rate.
Right.
Was the Public Service Commission's was in their order. That wasn't what I proposed. I was more interested in creating still time of use, but concepts around creating kind of a catalyst for storage that Hamilton mentioned. But my proposal was rejected, which I thought would have been really good for like ultimate, but it also, I think, addressed the concept of cost. So I think there's, in that space, I'll just say that I agree with Hamilton on the concept of range structure. It's pretty important. So, in the concept that if you produce energy and you consume it, it should be yours. The hard thing around that is that if you send it to the grid, it's going to somebody else.
Right.
The grid's got to exist. It's essentially the marketplace. that I actually have another solution, which I may file a program later, I can't talk about it now. But I think it would actually be very interesting to run another iteration. But I mean, I'll say this, it's, I think we have now maybe, we're up to maybe 11,000 private rooftop solar. And most people now they're not engaging in a lease, they're owning, which is really a smart, they put their money, they own the asset or will own the asset, and they're able to take advantage of, if they have tax liability, et cetera. So I think that market's going to develop. But I'm a true believer in the integration of another device, such as.
Right, I think, I agree with you. I think we'll jump the gun on that. It's a very severe time of use policy. I mean, it's 3 times the rate on peak off peak. So that's kind of hard to manage at the residential
I
level.
didn't propose it. It was much more, it was a little tighter.
But, yeah, and the other thing with the SRECs, the solar RECs.
Yeah.
It seems to me that the idea of that from a policy point of view is, and I don't know how again it works out in South Carolina, but companies have to utilize, there's a percentage of renewables that companies need to be using, right?
So there's,
And they can buy them out on the market, right?
so there's not, so in South Carolina, there's actually not it's a voluntary
Okay,
market. It's not but there was a point one time about 5 years ago when I raised my hand and said, you know what do we think about an RPS? Like everybody just like, oh, we can't do that. But there's I think that's the framework for the potential opportunity. You can think of like, okay, here's the energy. If I consume it, then I keep it, and therefore it's an offset. If it leaves and it's exported and goes to the grid, is there a construct at a later date where you could say, look, we think that is of value, and therefore it ties into instead of a voluntary, it conforms. In other words, you have to do it, right? It's no longer voluntary.
right.
That's a structure that actually that you probably, I don't know where you.
With New Jersey where it came from.
Yeah. So the SREC market's fascinating. New Jersey, I look at the prices all the time because it gives me an idea of how the business model could evolve. Yeah, absolutely.
And we have more sun potential here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Kassis, you were talking about a plan that would provide 2,000 megawatts with storage up to 3,000. And I apologize for knowing so little about your subject. How much energy is that? Can that run the university for a day? How much is that? How much of the total energy? Okay, can you give it as a percentage of total energy use also?
Yeah, so I think this is where maybe it's the untold story. So, so on a peak day, on the hottest summer day or the coldest winter day, it's usually about 4,500 megawatts total. Okay.
For what? For what? I mean, what
in
entity are
and
we
out,
talking about?
in and out. For the whole system, all of our system in South Carolina.
Okay, Dominion Energy 4,500 on a big peak day for all of
On
South
peak.
Carolina. Okay.
On an average day, like today was a really nice day. Okay, it's gonna be nice tomorrow morning when I run the bridge, but it's gonna be around 2,000. Okay, so here's the conundrum. So when solar produces at 2 o'clock and the demand is 2,000 and there's 2,000, you don't run the system on an intermittent resource. Because the first time the cloud cover goes over, you've got to still run spinning machines to be able to support it. And I think that's one of the reasons why that I always advocate there's got to be an interim solution. That's why storage is pretty important. So we're advantaged in South Carolina because we have pumped hydro. So we have a place to put overproduction, but there's got to be a solution. If we're going to get increasingly clean, we have to have a way to build more to scale. So we solve affordability, but you got to have a place to put it. So I don't want everybody to move to South Carolina and therefore increase the demand. I want to operate flexibly, but we got to have another solution in the interim. So the short story is 3,000 is a lot. It's more than, today it's more than what our peak, but it's in the plan, it's in the out years. It's not, you know, it's 25 to 2040 roughly is when it comes in. And it's shown in spacing that's in year increments, but it's not, but usually it'll come on probably differently.
Okay, I didn't understand the last thing you said. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
25 to.
All right, so
25.
solar's a bunch, it's a lot, it takes a minute, but it doesn't produce at night.
Right.
It doesn't produce.
Yeah, I got all that. I'm just,
Yeah.
the date of 2040.
The timing of when the integrated resource plan says it's.
Okay, so we're talking about perfecting the storage part of it by 2040.
I think it could be, not do storage contracts to that, so whether they get built, whether they get financed is another story. I think the technology's got to get better. It's got to, prices got to continue to come down. Supply chain issues have to be worked out, and it's got to function. It's good for about 3 hours, sometimes 4 hours, but you need storage for longer durations eventually.
Thank you.
And that was one of my questions I wanted to kind of pick up on.
Yeah.
I've had solar panels on my roof since December of 2012, and I can see from day to day, the variety of energy it produces. Cloud cover could completely wipe it out for the day. And similarly, in the winter, it's going to produce a lot less than it does in the summer, right? So you can use lithium-ion battery packs to bridge a couple of days, maybe, you know, a couple of hours, whatever. But long-term storage seems to be a critical component to transitioning to 100% or close to 100% renewable. So we're talking about, you know, large-scale solar panels and all this other kind of installation. What work is being done on, let's say, feasible long-term storage, like pump hydro, like they do have up in Sumter? Are we looking at doing more pump hydro? Are there alternative long-term storage systems that we're looking at doing?
You know, again, there's a bunch of work that's being done, and so that's you're right. I think at the end of the day, that's one of the keys is either to get the clean, you're either going to have another clean magic megawatt machine, or you're going to have to figure out how to get duration and storage. So like, for instance, I think if I'm thinking about technology, I'm thinking about potentially is there mechanical storage that eventually gets you to longer durations? Are there things like, you know, people talk about liquidator. So you're using energy when it's of excess, you're changing air, you're changing, and then, but you're also, because it's liquid, you're able to store it, right? And then all you transfer heat to it, it becomes, and so those are concepts that are, I don't think they're as far off as people think they are. I talk to a lot of folks, you know, in the innovation space that are working on that. You know, it's not like there aren't smart people that are going, oh, this is a problem. Everybody knows. You got it. You're exactly right. You're actually, the way you describe the way, at the end of the day, the way the technology works on your roof, it's no different than the way I have to operate my system. It's exactly, I can't operate it just on that one technology increasingly clean. I've got to have something else.
I want to be
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Are you shutting us down, Lori? I can.
I was gonna take one question. I just want to be mindful.
Okay.
You can't easily leave the room, you know, making it shows.
So you need to drive, that's why you need to drive here. It's good. I got to drive home now.
Yeah, do you want to address the storage one for a second?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, just a few comments on kind of the last bit of the conversation, including storage. So, I mean, I think this is another place where there's often confusion that there's some expectation that we're going to flip a switch and tomorrow we will be 100% clean energy, and that really isn't what's happening in the policy or regulatory arena or, you know, in real life on the grid. And what we're doing is moving in the direction of that. Generally, you see 2040, 2050 targets for 100% clean energy, which we don't probably know exactly how we're going to get there yet. The reality, though, is there's just more opportunity than we've taken advantage of generally anywhere in the country. And so we're continuing to just move in that direction. And as storage becomes more cost competitive, you're seeing it put on projects by developers. You're seeing utilities closing thermal plants, coal plants, replacing that capacity with large storage applications. NextEra is doing that down in Florida right now. You see other large southeastern utilities doing it. You know, Duke Energy has a 70% carbon reduction requirement in North Carolina. That's basically all I've been doing for the last 2 months is engaged in that process. And so it's very interesting to look at, you know, the economics and the technical reality of what you can and can't do. But I mean, Danny's right. Like, you absolutely need a variety of resources to keep the grid operating reliable and doing it in an economic way that doesn't penalize customers. And so that you know, that's where we are. It's just a question of like how big those different slices of the pie are, and whether or not we're setting ourselves up to move on that trajectory in an economically and environmentally wise way. And that's kind of the constant refinement that you see from a policy standpoint and regulatory standpoint, is always checking yourself and making sure, are we taking advantage of what we should, and are we heading in the direction that we should be? But at the end of the day, as Danny said, everyone's just trying to solve these problems, and there are applications that are ready for prime time now, and there are lots that'll be ready for prime time in not too long. And I have no doubt that if we have this conversation again in 2030, the world will be a completely different place, and we'll laugh at some of the things that we didn't think were going to be available here in 2022.
Is there still willing to talk? I'm going to take this as the last question.
Yeah, in terms of the load leveling and influencing consumer behavior, especially residential, the smart meters seem to be a step in that direction. However, the applications, are woefully, behind. They don't, like if I read, or I can't get my energy use by hour or finer increments, so I can't really relate my behavior, my energy use or my appliance use to what's happening on my bill. The other thing is I get a nice little monthly, document that says that, how I'm comparing to other, houses in the area. However, I'm an all electric home, and it says that I'm doing horribly against my neighbors, but I'm an all electric home. And, most people have, gas heating and water and, heating and all that. So, it's just, I'm an electrical computer engineer. I worked in load forecasting about 40 years ago, or 35 or something like that. It just is beyond me why such a blatant problem is.
I'll answer you. I'm not trying to be funny, but literally not everybody out there is a computer engineer. Okay, so here's the challenge: is that the technology actually is available. So I think what you're seeing is the first iteration. You're right. So the first thing is you've got to have the ability to see really discrete, and you've got to be able to provide that signalization to your customer. So there's technology out there that can already precise. I can tell you, once everything's installed, you're going to be able to get really precise about load signature and about specifically what it is. And we know that technology already exists because you're seeing it implemented in other markets. So it's just a matter. That's one of the reasons why the first, the precursor is get the technology out. Those are just really what I would describe as like the very, very early stage of what I think is possible. So your expectation should be they're going to be a lot different. So on the subset of the comparison on the demand side management program, I don't know the algorithm precisely to say who gets compared on the comparison. That's just a researchers have indicated that as an initial program. That's just, and we ran a program just like that several years ago where they did another initial rollout on DSM. And it was very effective in aggregating some energy efficiency savings. We'll see some from this program too, but by no means, it is very, you're with the early steps. So you're,
we were doing this, differentiating between, all electric and on homes, 40 years ago. And so why, it's like, it seemed like the first iteration should have had that, and then plus I'm sure the data is there, and it's just the, in terms of the smart meter and stuff, and how much power is being used all the time. It's just the application isn't, allowing a path back to the data for the user. And this is supposed to be something that a non-electrical engineer, should be able to, I can just see my, I can see what I'm using at a time, and so I'd like to see that.
That's
Those are the little things that really, that really kind of slow down the progress. We could have had to make more progress right now, get real, attention to those kind of details.
Yeah. It's part of the challenge, you're still working within the model. So for instance, when you deploy the millions of dollars on the advanced metering infrastructure, the regulatory body's got to approve, right? So there's a cost to it. So, but they're also trying to figure, this is where the model is really complicated, or it's kind of disconnected. So then, all right, so then you and I both know, because we deal with technology. We know we want to, we know that technology is probably going to help us get to the answer. Okay? It almost assured. But you still have to get the expense approved, and the entity that's going to approve the expense, they're going to want to define, and maybe define what the payback is. So they're doing their job as a regulator. That's where it gets disconnected. I like for me, like I'd rather not have to, but they're going to make sure that I'm going to spend prudently. That's what they're looking for. And sometimes you don't precisely know the answer to how much savings or energy efficiency you can get in the model. I can tell you, I think you're right, that I think there's going to be huge benefits from AMI for those investments. They will play out over years. They'll help establish, I think, what will also be a remarkable opportunity in the distributed energy resource space.
All right, I want to be mindful that 15 minutes over the end time is. I love that you're so engaged, but let's take a moment and have a record. For joining us, and these guys will be here for a moment. Everyone, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Clint.
Stay for the reception.
Yeah.